Hi, I'm John, and in this video I'll show you how to use entrance animations in Fancy Animations. This new update introduces some incredibly interesting features, granting you significant freedom and enhanced flexibility as you add your desired entrance animations. Now, if we navigate to an element within our bricks editor, such as this specific image, and then proceed to its style settings, followed by the entrance animation section, we will observe a range of new options available. In this instance, we will begin with the more obvious adjustments, overwriting the animation's duration and overwriting its delay. Subsequently, we'll proceed to implement the entrance animations. For instance, regarding this image, if we intend for the animation to last just 1 second, we can readily observe that this is indeed its full animation duration. However, if our desire is for the animation to extend to 2 seconds, we can adjust it to be 3 seconds. Thus, this indicates the total duration for which the animation will play. By default, we can set the animation duration and delay for all animations within our plugin settings. This lets us establish the standard timing and waiting period for each and every animation universally. We can easily modify this. For instance, in this situation, we can also define the delay. If I want it with 0 seconds, the animation will appear as soon as the element is visible. For example, for this one, we can add a delay of 0.3. In this particular instance, should I scroll the page up and then down, we can observe that a staggered animation is present and active. We don't need to perform this manually, it simply serves as an example for you to understand how to add different animations. This delay is very useful when we're in the hero section and the page has just loaded. Consequently, we can implement varying delays to the animations, thereby generating captivating effects. We will now demonstrate how to effectively employ staggered animations across various elements on your web page. Now, with this new version, we can do exactly that. Let's explore and try out some other available options. For instance, we are going to establish that in this situation, when we scroll back up, we can clearly observe that the animation activates instantly as soon as the element becomes visible on the screen, revealing itself in full view. Currently, we have several distinct options available. We are able to set the condition for an element to activate its animation right after it becomes entirely visible. In this scenario, we can see that this particular element has already been activated, but the first image will only activate once the element becomes completely visible. This new option is truly fascinating, as it guarantees that the animation will consistently trigger the moment the element is in view. Another option is, for instance, that we want the animation to be triggered depending on a specific percentage of the screen viewport. For example, I want the animation to activate when it reaches 20% visibility. This 20% will ascend from the bottom. Consequently, we'll observe that approximately 20% covers this screen segment. If we scroll upward, we then perceive that the element triggered the animation as soon as it reached 20%. So, here we can accurately define the exact screen percentage at which the animation will be triggered. In this specific instance, it is set to 40 at 50. For example, here, if we scroll up a bit more, the animation will trigger at 50% of the screen. This will provide you with significantly more flexibility when you're adding your entrance animations. For example, if we set it to be fully visible, well, that will also change. If the element reaches the 50% mark at the bottom of the screen, the behavior of the animation changes significantly. So you can define it right here. Let's say the most recommended setting is to always use the always visible as option. For example, we can assign a 10% margin, which allows us sufficient time to fully appreciate the animation as we scroll through the page. Therefore, you have the flexibility to customize this to your liking and generate exceptionally captivating visual effects within the viewport. Another important feature allows us to specify that the animation should remove itself when the element drops below the trigger percentage. For instance, let's establish this at 40%. So we have it set, and until we reach that 40% threshold, the animation won't even activate. The animation was triggered here, but if we scroll down again and the element falls below 40% of the viewport, it will then become hidden from view. This is very useful in some cases, and you can play around with your creativity. So that's yet another option. It's also incredibly useful for the new custom animations we've recently added to Fancy Animations. And for example, here we now have the options to run only once. This functionality is exclusive to the front end, meaning you won't observe it within the editor itself. However, as is quite apparent, the animation will exclusively execute a single time upon its initial appearance on the screen. So it's very useful when you only want that element to animate one time. Well, for instance, right here we are going to when this particular situation occurs, which, we're currently at 40%, I'll go ahead and adjust it to 10. Here, we have the ability to specify whether the animation should utilize an elastic timing function. If we enable this setting, we observe the animation's alteration. This becomes much more evident when examining an element, for instance, a bounce effect. We can see there's a more elastic bounce. Let's see it more clearly with slide. Let's find, for instance, slide right to left. As you can clearly observe, a slight bounce effect is present here. If we would prefer not to experience that slight bounce, we can simply deactivate it. If we want the bounce, we activate this function. We can also disable the animation on mobile or on tablet. For example, on tablet, I'm going to use the brick's default breakpoint. You can clearly see it's not working properly. If I only want to disable it on mobile devices, the animation will just activate. It will be disabled on mobile, as you can see. Alright, so these are very interesting features. Let's explore one of the functions that is also designed for. We'll also explore staggered animations and a brand new animation feature we've introduced, which is called custom animation. This exciting addition allows us to fully design and implement our own unique animations, providing unparalleled creative control over visual effects within the Bricks editor. In this case, we can define that if the element is always visible and create an animation based on the visible element. In this specific situation, for the element to become visible, we'll set its opacity to 1. Understood? Thus, our element is now visible. And we are going to begin to apply animations. So by utilizing this, we can leverage all the great entrance features of Fancy Animations, including viewport control, percentage-based triggers, staggered effects, and custom triggers to craft your very own animations. How exactly can we achieve this? Let's proceed, for instance, to this animation that I already have prepared over here. We have some CSS, and here, for instance, I must define the root which represents the class of the element itself, or its unique ID in this particular scenario. Okay, so we're going to apply the fb-anim custom class here, right? This specific class is where we'll be applying the animation, which is referred to as fb-anim name. Does that make sense? It is extremely important that you integrate this particular part, and we'll identify it as the keyframes for the animation. So we have the ability to utilize blur, we can apply zoom in and zoom out effects, incorporate various keyframes, and integrate diverse properties. Understand? You now have the freedom to design your animation precisely as you envision it. Next, we will explore staggered animations. Oh, that's right, I nearly forgot something important about these custom animations. Now, with the addition of custom animations, we gain the flexibility to not only craft the animation itself, but also to extensively experiment with its trigger mechanisms. In this specific instance, when incorporating a custom animation, we could, for example, navigate to the section. That section also includes an animation. Furthermore, the entrance animation includes a custom animation feature, and it also provides the option to, for example, remove the animation once it falls below the trigger percentage threshold. With that capability, we are able to achieve fascinating effects, such as this one, where we can readily adjust the background and various other properties when the element comes into view at a specific screen position. In this specific scenario, at 50%, we observe the background changing, and if we scroll back, it then deactivates once more. In this specific scenario, activating the entrance animations will also lead to the addition or removal of a particular class, which is designated as fb-anim-customactive. Consequently, we are then able to define it as red, for example, in this specific instance. We have the option to remove this here. This was merely a test I was running, but as you can see, it is now functioning. Understood? For instance, if we desire the cards to be of an alternative color now, we can certainly achieve that by utilizing this particular class as well. So if you are a user who knows CSS, you'll be able to play around with this. So for instance, if we wish for the cards, for example, all their nested divs, to undergo a change, that option is indeed provided. Consequently, this will then transform into an inner div by way of illustration. Therefore, we have a diverse range of different options available to us here. Right, as you can see. So we can now experiment with various properties. For instance, we can configure it so that the cards themselves also undergo a color transformation. Specifically, when set to custom, the main element will be displayed in red, and concurrently, the individual cards will appear in black. Additionally, we plan to modify the color value. For example, to white. So we can begin to experiment with that. Utilizing this method, we can accomplish truly captivating and interesting transitions such as these. Now we'll delve into staggered animations, which represents a highly significant enhancement in this latest update. This functionality empowers us to apply staggered animations to individual elements housed within a query loop, thereby eliminating the necessity of manually adding a delay to each and every element. Add the delay to each of the elements. In this case, for example, I'm going to go to... In the context of the grid, I will navigate to the entrance animations, and this specific option will be applied to the parent element containing the cards. For this particular scenario, it's essential that we specify the individual steps, and well, specifically in this instance, it will perform the staggered animation at intervals of every 0.3 seconds. So this specific one will activate at 0.3, then 0.6, 0.9, right? Followed by 1.2. It will perform that particular staggered animation sequence. We'll also be able to define the columns. This is very important because if we leave it on default, it will add 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, 1.2, 1.5. So, this specific type of animation doesn't display optimally when we're dealing with multiple distinct rows, you see? Therefore, to achieve that, we must specify the number of columns present at each of the various breakpoints. In this case, it's going to reset the delay. So 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, 1.2. Back to 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, okay? This is how we initiate the reset, so the same principle applies if the columns are rearranged for tablets, or if the columns experience modifications for mobile landscape and portrait orientations. If the columns are altered in such a way, we must configure them, specifying the exact number of columns required so that the animation delay can effectively reset with each new column segment. This way, when the animation plays, let's explicitly define it here. As we can see, if I keep on making changes, and as the animation progressively appears, we can clearly observe that it is a staggered animation. Right? So there we have it. Our fancy animations provide staggered animations without needing to go element by element. Adding these animations. If I remove this now, we will observe that the behavior won't really function as intended, because upon performing this action, you'll immediately notice that. In this specific instance, always remember to hit Apply Animation, given that Bricks does not render CSS classes or other attributes instantaneously, which is crucial for proper display and functionality. Consequently, to achieve that, we must hit Apply Animations, and the editor will then refresh its display. Therefore, if you happen to observe an animation glitches within the editor, or if you run into some kind of issue, you really must press Apply Animation to ensure the animation renders and applies correctly. So in this particular scenario, as we can readily see, this means that the animation takes an excessively long time to execute, creating a noticeable delay. Why? Because we perform an immediate page load? Yes, it could actually function. However, if we are among those users who continuously scroll, we will notice that it does not function properly, and the delay requires an excessive amount of time to load. Therefore, for this reason, this option was included so that the delays would reset after a specific number of columns. That's been everything for the entrance animations in Fancy Animations. This new update, as you can see, brings quite a few new features. Now, animations have become far more flexible, allowing you to achieve much more advanced outcomes. You have the ability to craft your own unique animations and establish custom triggers. For instance, you can precisely specify the viewport percentage at which an animation should initiate, or you can opt for the animation to activate immediately upon the element becoming visible, or when the element is completely visible, and it also supports staggered animations. Well, you now have a wide variety of options at your disposal, which will provide you with immense flexibility when it comes to integrating and perfecting your animations effortlessly. Alright, and lastly, this is a minor update. Regarding border animations, you now have the ability to incorporate a border radius. For example, here you can add a variable, you can add a value, a pixel value, for example 20 pixels. Right here we have it set to 10 pixels. You also have the ability to incorporate a border radius to these animations. Border. Alright, that's everything. I hope you liked this new update. You'll now have much more flexibility and a lot more freedom when adding entrance animations, much more control, which is the most important thing, and it includes many of the features you've asked for on the roadmap. So, if you have any suggestions or specific requests, feel free to add them to the roadmap, and I will certainly take them into consideration for future updates. Anyway, that wraps things up here. I'll catch you all in the next video. Farewell.